Strange Brew Podcast, Season 1, Episode 336. We are still waiting for a Matt LaFleur contract extension. This is Wednesday, so we're earlier than normal. We'll talk about that as we get out of the tease here, but I kind of thought by now we'd have the LaFleur extension. I still think he's coming back. I still think there's going to be a 3-year extension, and he's probably going to get in the neighborhood of $15 million per year. But as we talked about on the Monday podcast, there is some nuance here where he is a highly desirable head coach to teams that have openings, and now we've added another name to that list with the Steelers and Mike Tomlin stepping down yesterday. 19 years he was there. My God, by God. But he is a guy that any of the teams that have openings would love to have, and he is also a guy that the Packers seem to want to have, but maybe we're getting a little long in the tooth with the relationship, so where do they land on the amount of years and the amount of money that he's going to get? Maybe that's the sticking point, but I'm somewhat surprised we're recording on Wednesday, and we have not had an update on that as of yet. I've got a bunch of emails we'll get to as it relates to Matt LaFleur and the future of the Green Bay Packers. We'll hit on a few of those as well. Aaron Rodgers, did his career come to an end on Monday? Unceremoniously, kind of a close game late second half, but that Texans defense is the real deal. Number 1 defense in the NFL, and Rodgers, is his career ending like Favre's with a pick 6? Not a pretty stat line for him. He had some interesting comments post-game, not only about his future, but about Mike Tomlin pre the news we got yesterday, and about Matt LaFleur, too. Unsolicited, brought up Matt LaFleur in his post-game presser. We'll play a little bit of that off the top from the Aaron Rodgers post-game presser on Monday. We'll talk about the Bucs. There's a lot of conversation about Matt LaFleur, and we're going to keep talking about that and whether or not he should be the guy for the Packers going forward. You know who's flying under the radar as a guy who should be fired? Doc Rivers. A disgusting effort last night at Fiserv Forum where the crowd booed the team, and then Giannis booed back at the crowd. Don't love that. Don't love that. I'm still going to stick with what he said a week and a half ago. You said, I'm telling you that's going to be a new segment on the show. You said, I'm sticking with he wants to be here. He wants to retire here. He's going to sign the extension hopefully in October, and this is all going to be just a rumor-filled beginning part of the year in the offseason, but I didn't love that last night. I think Bucs fans were well within their right to boo the effort they saw against a team in the Timberwolves that did not have Anthony Edwards and did not have Rudy Gobert, their 2 best players. But then Giannis had a dunk in the early third quarter, a 3-point play, then he booed back at the crowd. Not an ideal situation. The Bucs are 17-23. Lost at Denver on Sunday, lost last night, and I think Doc's got to go. I like Doc as a guy. Doc's got to go. He's the coach who should be fired in the state of Wisconsin. And I've got some sweet, sweet Matt Lepay walk-off winner from John Blackwell calls last night that we're going to play here coming up. We might just play that on a loop for 55 minutes. The Badgers hit a game-winning shot, their first one since Bronson Koenig and Xavier. That was back in the 2016 tournament, and we get a great Lepay call of it. We'll touch on that, too. Let's go.
On the ground, a chance here. Durham to Hardy to first. Hit time! Yes! The Brewers win! Yes!
Here comes Melvin to the 25, to the 20, Gordon 15, 10, 5, touchdown! Wisconsin! Record-breaking run!
Morgan, a smash up the middle, base hit to center. Here comes Gomez around third. A throw, and the Brewers win.
Here's the snap. He looks, he throws, and complete interception. And there is your Super Bowl dagger.
Booker the drive, gets inside, leans in, knocked away and stolen by Holiday. Phoenix has to foul on a pinnacle ball, throws it down.
Swinging fly ball in the right center. Broxton is there, and they're the champions. They have done it.
It's been a 50-year journey. Wisconsin, we've got a room at the top of the world tonight. The Milwaukee Bucks are NBA champions.
Yeah, welcome in Wednesday morning. As I mentioned on Monday, we will do a Wednesday podcast as opposed to a Thursday or Friday podcast because I am gone on Thursday and Friday. I think we mentioned this on the Monday pod. I know we mentioned on the air. This has been on the books for my wife and I for a while. My wife is going up to Stevens Point, my alma mater. She's got a curling tournament, and I have a curling tournament with my men's team that starts tomorrow. We'll be on the ice tomorrow at this time. A bonspiel in the curling vernacular. I'm not sure what the etymology is of that, but I probably won't look it up either. We'll get our producers on that. But it's called a bonspiel. And we are going to go down to the Chicago Curling Club tomorrow through Well, through Sunday, we'll see. If you got to win to keep going and be playing on Sunday. Hopefully we're playing Sunday. But for sure, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I am off on Thursday and Friday. Now, because this tournament, this Bonspiel, is in Chicago, of course, I was planning on peacocking and wearing my Packer hoodie from the 2010 Super Bowl title year. And my wife got me a nice Packer pullover. I was going to wear that on the ice and just Ric Flair strut my ass around all weekend. Well, I don't know if I'm going to be doing that. We had a texter this morning on the morning show say, do you still have the balls to go down there and wear all of your Packer gear given what happened? Well, first of all, it is the Chicago Curling Club. There are 32 teams competing this weekend. I think only 2 or 3 of them are actually in the Chicago Curling Club. We've got our team. We've got a few Madison teams, some Canadian teams. I don't know if I'm ready to go beer for beer with the Canadian teams. I've heard some things. I've never been at a Bonspiel with authentic Canadian teams before. Canada, eh? I am a little worried about what that looks like on a drink-to-drink basis once we're done curling on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But anyhow, the question was, do you have the balls to still go down there and wear a cheese head on the ice? I don't know if we're going to be doing that because I don't want to relive that. I think I might just pretend like I don't know what football is. What football? What's a football? Like the kid in A Christmas Story when he's sitting on Santa's lap. How about a nice football? Football? What's a football? I've never heard of this. I don't follow sports. Maybe that's what I'll tell them. I'm more into finance or volunteering, getting out there and shaking hands. But I don't know. I've never heard of this football thing you speak of. I don't know. We might still have to have one piece of Packer gear out there. I'm sure I'm going to hear it, but what are you going to do? Are they going to bring the cheese grater hats out? But my plan was, especially when it was 21-3 at halftime, I'm thinking, we're going to load it up for the whole weekend. We're going to have Packer gear on and wave the flag the entire weekend. I don't feel about that anymore. But that is where I am tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday. Back in action on Monday and have a regular Monday, Friday. And then I'm going to work a couple full weeks in a row. It has become quite a conversation on the B93 text line of how much vacation do I get? Exactly how much PTO do you receive in the radio world? We've probably worked 2 full weeks since Thanksgiving. A lot of vacation days to burn and holidays falling in the middle of the week and that kind of stuff. And like I said, this has been on the books for a while. But we are going to work, I think, 6 consecutive full weeks before our spring training trip will take us out in the second week of March. But we'll be back on a Monday, Friday, as per usual next week, but a Monday, Wednesday this week. Now, I want to start just with a little Aaron Rodgers audio. It was Monday Night Football, Texans and Steelers. Like I said on Monday, with the Packers out, I am now rooting for the Bills. I am rooting for Aaron Rodgers, and I am rooting for any team playing the Bears. The other sad thing about this curling Bonspiel, the Bear game is the last game of the weekend. I was kind of hoping at least maybe they would have the Saturday game, and then that would be on at the club. And if the Rams beat them, which I expect that they're going to on Saturday, then we'd still see some sad Bears fans. So that would have been kind of nice. But that's the last game. That's 5:30 on Sunday. We'll be home by then. But Steelers and Texans, I was hoping maybe we'd get one playoff win out of Aaron Rodgers. I was not optimistic that the Texans defense is the best in the NFL. They showed why again on Monday. It was kind of a close game. Steelers got a quick 3-0 lead. It was 7-6 Texans into the second half, I think, and then it just unraveled. That Houston defense was all over Rodgers. He eventually throws a pick 6 at the end of it. Quite a tackle effort on that pick 6, too. Rodgers sold that with 2.5 minutes left, down 23-6. Why am I going to sacrifice my 42-year-old body for this? But that's how it ended for Rodgers. Not a good stat line for him. Obviously not a great night for Steelers fans. And then the question became, as you would expect, every camera was around Rodgers as he walked off the field. And then in the post-game and the press conference, he was peppered with questions about, is this it? After whatever it is now, 20 years or 21 years in the NFL, is this it? Is this your last game? And he deferred, and he said what we kind of expected him to say. I'm not going to make an emotional decision in the moment. I might have to go on a darkness retreat and go trip balls in South America. I have to consult my fake wife. There's a lot of steps we have to go through before I determine whether or not I'm going to come back. Now, remember, we played the audio before Week 18, I think it was, where he was saying, look, I have a 1-year contract in Pittsburgh, and after that, I'm a free agent. And remember, he said that I feel like I'm going to have at least a few options for next year. It did feel like there was a finality to it, but I would say the same thing when they lost to the Lions in 2022 in his final game at Lambeau Field, and he walked off with Randall Cobb. He's got Randall Cobb. I thought that was it then, too. Troy Aikman said on the broadcast he felt like this is it. Everybody seemed to think that's it. But you're going to have to give him the Favre tractor watch time. We're not going to really know until we get to spring what his intentions are as to whether or not he's going to play in 2026. But just remember that audio before Week 18 where he kind of hinted that it felt like he was going to play another year. But here are some of his comments. He had some very nice things to say about the Packers. Here is the commentary on both playing in Green Bay and Pittsburgh, two heritage football cities.
Much history and tradition as the Steelers.
I was fortunate to play in an incredible football city for 18 years. And I never took it for granted. I enjoyed that time there. And this has been a really beautiful back end to that first 18, to be able to be here for a year. This is a special place. You got tradition, got excellence, got all-time greats. Even just looking around the stadium tonight just to see the fans, there wasn't a big splattering of Texans fans. And there's a lot to be said for that. There's only a few really special places in the league that have the tradition and the town and the organization, and I'm thankful to have played for two of them.
Very nice. And then he also did talk about Mike Tomlin. Now, we have more updates on that, but he not only talked about Tomlin and some of the better coaches in the NFL and the longer tenured coaches in the NFL, he did go out of his way to bring up Matt LaFleur, which I'm sure he read like all of us were talking about on Monday, whether or not he is going to be the guy, whether or not he'll get a contract extension in Green Bay.
I mean, this league has changed a lot in my 21 years. When you hear a conversation about the Mike Tomlins of the world, Matt LaFleurs of the world, those are just two that kind of I've played for. And when I first got in the league, there wouldn't be conversation about whether those guys were on the hot seat, But the way that the league is covered now, and the way that there's snap decisions and the validity given to the Twitter experts and all the experts on TV now who make it seem like they know what the hell they're talking about.
Podcasters.
To me, that's an absolute joke. And for either of those two guys to be on the hot seat is really apropos of where we're at as a society and a league, because obviously Matt's done a lot of great things in Green Bay, and we had a lot of success. Mike T has had more success than damn near anybody in the league, for the last 19, 20 years. And more than that, though, when you have the right guy and the culture is right, you don't think about making a change. But there's a lot of pressure that comes from the outside, and obviously that sways decisions from time to time. But it's not how I would do things and not how the league used to be.
I thought interesting commentary from him, and I also thought intriguing that he went out of his way to reference Matt LaFleur in that conversation going on. Now, Rodgers, do you think he'll be back next year? If you had to put a percentage chance on it, I'd put it at 10, I guess, or 5. I did write about on Tuesday, and we put those clips in the blog as I stuck with the written word on Tuesday. Since we're podcasting early, no blog today, but so far I'm 2 for 2 in weeks of trying to get back to writing on the blog. As I put it in the blog on Tuesday, if he does play, I felt like, now this is prior to the Mike Tomlin news, my feeling was that the two most likely spots heading into 2026 would have been the two most likely spots heading into 2025, which were Pittsburgh and Minnesota. And it sounded like even in the middle of summer last year, Minnesota felt like they had confidence and faith in J.J. McCarthy, and they were not entertaining any ideas of bringing in 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Eventually, he lands in Pittsburgh, and they win 10 games, and they kind of got lucky last week, but they get into the playoffs as the AFC North Division champs. And when you look to next year, and you look at what teams are going to be searching for a quarterback, or what teams think they're a 43 then by December of next year, think they're a former 4-time MVP who's about to be 43 years old away from winning a division or making a Super Bowl push, I guess, or at least getting into the playoffs. The list is pretty small of teams that I think would be interested in Rodgers' services, but it's those two teams again, because the Steelers don't have a hot shot backup quarterback. They've got Mason Rudolph. He's been there for 6 or 7 years. He's fine for a game or two, but he's not going to be the guy going forward. I think they tried that at some point, then didn't Myles Garrett hit him over the head with a helmet, and that was the end of that. But they tried that with Mason Rudolph. He's not going to be the guy, and there's nobody else there. And when you look at Minnesota, the question is now, is J.J. McCarthy, what is their confidence level in him heading into year 2? He certainly will be given a chance to start next year, but didn't show you a ton outside of a handful of games. And Max Brosmer, Brock Lesnar, Brosmer, didn't look good in relief of J.J. McCarthy. They don't have another young quarterback there. So would that still be a landing spot? Could he still do the whole full Favre? Could he go the full 5 Favres, the full 9 Favres, and go to Minnesota with a stop in Pittsburgh in between the New York trip and the potential Viking trip? I did think it was funny in all the commentary he had about where he's played. He didn't reference New York once, the 2 years of the Jets. He hates the Jets. I think we all hate the Jets. The Jets hate the Jets. Jets fans hate the Jets. Yeah, he didn't reference them at all. But those, to me, still feel like the 2 most likely spots that he would end up, but I would put it at a very low percentage chance. I think this is a fine coda to his career. You want to forget about the running in with the American flag week 1 with the Jets the first year he was there, tearing his Achilles 10 minutes later and being done for the year, and then the debacle that was year 2 where they bring in Devontae and tried to surround him with some of his former players, but just no sense of direction in that organization, and they win whatever. They win 6 games or 7 games, won 7-10. Nobody wanted that to be the lasting memory of Aaron Rodgers. I feel like he got a pretty good epilogue here where you win 10 games, you win a division, you play in a home playoff game, first playoff game for him since 2021. That might not be a bad way to ride off into the sunset, but if he does come back, and I would put that at 10% or less, those 2 destinations feel like they'd be the most likely. Whenever it ends for him, whether it is this year or he's going to try to play one more year, he will sign a 1-day contract and retire Packer. He's basically already said that that's where he wants to retire. Everybody remembers him as a Packer. That's his most defining legacy. And he has said he wants to be back, and he will be back. There's not going to be a waiting period like there was with Brett Favre because there was so much acrimony when he manipulated his way to Minnesota and then almost won a Super Bowl with them. I was having a conversation at the curling table on Monday talking about Rodgers because the game was on after our Monday league, the Steelers game. And we were talking about, I wonder how many years it would have added if Favre would have won a Super Bowl in Minnesota in 2009 when they were the number 2 seed and they were, this isn't Detroit, man, this is the Super Bowl. You could take a knee and kick a 56-yard field goal. They were a score away from being in the Super Bowl. As it was with the way Favre did what he did to get to Minnesota, how many years did we have in there? Was he welcomed back in 2016 or 2017? And he retired in 2010. So there was about a 5, 6, 7 year gap there before we all felt good enough to bring Favre back. I wonder how much longer that would have been had he won a Super Bowl in Minnesota. Would he have been back? I think at this point he would have been back. But you might want to tack on 2 or 3 years there. If there is the everlasting memory of Favre in a Viking jersey hoisting the Lombardi trophy, that definitely adds a few years. There will not be any waiting period that we need whenever it is that Rodgers retires. I would think that summer he will be back, signing a contract, getting his flowers, getting the standing ovation, getting his name in the Ring of Honor, maybe getting his number retired. I think that's got to be right there. I know they don't do it often, but that feels like a very likely thing that they will do. That's not going to take much time at all. I did put in the blog, I think it would be really cool when these guys sign 1-day contracts if they're still in playing shape. Now, you don't want to throw a guy out there who hasn't played in 5 or 6 years, but if he comes back in summer and they sign him to a 1-day contract, my guess is they'll do it around training camp at the beginning of the year to generate some momentum heading into the regular season. Not that the Packers need that, but I think that just makes sense timeline-wise. Wouldn't it be fun if he signed a 1-day contract and played for a quarter in a preseason game? You know? He plays in the Bishop's Charities game, and he plays for a half, and he's got the old 12 on. He's slinging it. I'm sure he wouldn't want to do that. And why would you risk going out there and getting hurt, even though I feel like you could have a gentleman's agreement not to hit the old man, not to knock the old guy, and let him play a couple series and just give us one last memory of Rodgers at Lambeau? I think that'd be really cool. It would never happen, but that would be kind of cool. But I do not think there will be any waiting period there whenever it is that he hangs it up. Yeah, I would put it at less than 10% that he will be back. All right, so that's the Rodgers conversation. Now let's move on to where we are with Matt LaFleur now, a couple of days removed from the loss in Chicago Saturday night, his press conference on Sunday evening, and then he has not talked to the media since then. It was locker room clean-out day for the Packers on Monday. Basically, everybody gave a pretty strong endorsement. The 2 strongest endorsements for LaFleur came from Tucker Kraft, who spoke for quite some time, and Micah Parsons, who spoke for quite some time. Both gave updates on their ACL injuries. Tucker hurt his in Week 9 against Carolina. Obviously, Micah Week 15 in Denver when the whole season frittered away. Both said they're on pretty good timelines, aggressive timelines. Tucker felt like he'd be ready by September. Micah Parsons has been teasing on social media that he feels like he could be ready for Week 1 coming back from an ACL. That would be less than 9 months. That would be faster by a month than I think Christian Watson's return. He was more realistic when they asked him about that in the locker room as he was on crutches. He said, I'd like to say week 1, but probably more like week 3 or 4 or toward the end of September, early October. But both offered strong endorsements of Matt LaFleur, and he's the guy. Micah, I think I'm paraphrasing, said he's a part of the reason he wanted to come to Green Bay when that trade was on the table. LaFleur was a part of why he wanted to be here. Tucker Kraft said the nuance of the offense, and now you've got guys 2, 3, 4 years deep to bring somebody else in and implement a whole new system. He feels like things are still going in the right direction. And Tucker talked about what we talked about on Monday, which you have to talk about when you do the biopsy of the season. You have to do autopsy. That's what I'm looking for. Well, biopsy works too. But when you look at the autopsy of this year, you must bring up the injuries and not just the sheer amount, but the key players, the top 3 or 4, in Micah's case, maybe top 1. The amount of guys that went down that were significant contributors and you thought would be big pieces of a 1 seed or a 2 seed, a playoff run, winning multiple games, and maybe making a run to the Super Bowl, that has to be a part of it. And Tucker said, look, I hate to be an excuse guy, but I feel like if I was out there, I feel like if Micah was out there down the stretch run, maybe things go differently. And I think they're probably right. You probably do end up winning 12 games, and maybe that game on Saturday is at Lambeau Field and not Soldier Field. But they both gave strong endorsements of Matt LaFleur. Now, I do have some emails here as it relates to LaFleur. Oh, I forgot to get up. Did you see the AI? Maybe I can find it here. Did you see the AI LaFleur press conference? We played it on the V Morning Show because whoever wrote the script in AI used Sheboygan, that Matt LaFleur is going to have to go work at a Wendy's in Sheboygan because Brandon McManus can't make a kick here. I think I got it. Hold on.
Coach Johnson and the Bears on the victory.
There we go. Now, this is AI. Now, I said on the morning show, and I'm really preaching this right now for an audience that's probably my age or maybe a little bit older. AI is getting so good, and especially this stuff, which I think we used to call deep fakes, but I don't think that's what the terminology is anymore. But this is Matt LaFleur, and it looks like Matt LaFleur talking into microphones at the Packer podium at Lambeau Field, and somebody has written him a script, and AI is manipulating his mouth movements to make it look like that's what he's saying. You have to be careful on social media now, but this is such a funny clip.
First and foremost, I want to congratulate Coach Johnson and the Bears on the victory. Second, I want to thank our kicker, Brandon McManus, for securing me a job working the 3 a.m. drive-thru at the Wendy's in Sheboygan, because that's where I'm going to be, because our sorry-ass kicker can't kick the ball straight. All right, that's all for now. See you guys in Cancun.
You know what? Maybe that wasn't AI. Maybe that wasn't AI at all. Maybe that's one that we could all believe. I did laugh at that. Oh, God, those are getting really sharp and really sophisticated. But the emails we got on, what is the order we want to go in here? Oh, I did get an email. This isn't to the podcast email, strangebrewpod@AOL.com. All one word, strangebrewpod@AOL.com. By the way, like, subscribe, rating, please. I don't know. I think I'm just done begging for that. You can't make me beg anymore. But if you could, that'd be great. But the email is strangebrewpod, all one word, pod, all one word, at AOL.com. I got an email just to my work account from a longtime listener on the morning show. He's a Bears fan. We have Bears fans that listen. I had texts when I got here on Monday morning, the bear down. Our buddy Ron, who is a friendly Bears fan. That's actually how he's saved on our text line. There's, you can add contact information on our text line. He is saved as friendly Bears fan. But he shot me an email on Monday, and we talked on Monday about the Ben Johnson, the handshake, and I think he's kind of cosplaying as a Dan Campbell alpha when that maybe isn't what he really is, but he spent time with Dan Campbell. He knows what the fans want, and he gives the quick handshake, and he's kind of screaming in LaFleur's face, and then he's in the locker room, bleep the Packers, bleep them, I hate those guys. Then Ben Johnson was asked about that from Bears media on Monday about, is that the way you should be handling yourself? And he said, look, I hate that team. I hate them. And me and George McCaskey, the owner, were on the same page there, so that's just the way it is. It's a rivalry. And we said on Monday, to the victor go the spoils. This is just sports. Don't take it too seriously. This is just sports, okay? This isn't running an orphanage. You're not trying to check everybody's background to make sure they're of high moral character. This is only sports. And it is a big rivalry, and that has been reignited now. And with the way they won in Week 16 at Soldier Field and the way they won in a playoff game Saturday night, to the victor go the spoils. Talk your trash if you want to talk your trash. You've earned it, and we can't say anything about it. But Ron said in an email to me on Monday, can you explain why Packer fans are so butthurt over Ben Johnson when at every opportunity you play the Bears still suck heading into Packer Bear weekend and play the Clay Matthews Bears still suck audio as well? That's a fair point, Ron. That's another reason why, like I said on Monday, to the victor go the spoils. They won. They won the last two in dramatic, shocking fashion. It feels like maybe they're turning a corner as a franchise with their head coach and their quarterback, and they're feeling themselves, and I guess they should. I mean, what can we say right now with the way the last two games have gone? And I would agree with Ron's assessment of how many times do Packer fans say the Bears still suck, and we play the song ad nauseum, and then when somebody's talking trash to us, oh, not very classy. Well, Ron's right, and we said that Monday. Hey, if you win the way that they won, it is your right to talk trash. All right, so let's do some emails here. Where's my AOL? Did I get it up? Christ almighty, John. Grab your glove and get in the game. Here we go.
You've got mail.
We have Keith in Howard's Grove. He said, John, you dismissed the 7-seed conversation about the Packers being the last seed in the last 3 years. But if that seed didn't exist, he put in quotes, then Matt LaFleur would not have been to the playoffs since 2021, and in all likelihood, they've already moved on from him. That's also a fair point, but that's not the world we live in. This is the old if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle, or if my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. I get it. I mean, I know that that's probably true. If the 7 seed doesn't exist and they don't add that, then Matt LaFleur has not been to the playoffs since that 13-10 loss to the Niners at Lambeau Field in 2021, which is the last time Rodgers was in the playoffs up until Monday. And I think that email is probably correct, but that's not the world we live in. And I know we talk about hypotheticals a lot and project a lot and do all that kind of stuff. That's just eating up time in the radio world and the podcast world. I understand that we do that, but as accurate as that is, that's just not the world we live in. They've been in the playoffs the last 3 years. 2 years ago on this day in history, what a day we had 2 years ago, everybody. 2 years ago, on January 14th, 2024, we got the Packers walking into Dallas and beating the brakes off of the Cowboys and ruining Jerry Jones's last 3 years, it feels like. And then later that night, we got the Dame Lillard walk-off three against the Kings at Fiserv Forum, and it felt like Dame time was fully here, and the Bucks were kind of rolling at that point. What a day we had. January 14th, 2024. Take me back. No, Keith is 100% correct. If the 7 seed didn't exist, but it does, then LaFleur would not have been to the playoffs since 2021. And yes, absolutely. I would think after last year then. If that's the world we're going to visit here for a second, I don't think he would have been in trouble. He would not have been in trouble at the end of 2022 because that's the Rodgers exit. He would not have been in trouble in 2023 because if that year goes the same way, but there's just not a 7 seed, they were bad to begin the year. They got a lot better toward the end of the year. They finished 9-8. Love had a great run the last 8 weeks. That built momentum into 2020. So what year would that have been then? 2024? He would have been safe after that. The first time there would have been a real conversation about LaFleur, if the 7 seed didn't exist, would have been after last year. So instead of going to Philly and losing wild card round, they would not have been in the playoffs for a third straight year and a second straight year with Love as the franchise quarterback. You would have started to hear things. And then certainly this year, if the 7 seed doesn't exist and he's still here, then the pitchforks would be out. And Keith is not wrong, but that's just not, I mean, I don't understand what we gain from that conversation because the 7 seed does exist and they have been in the playoffs the past 3 years. We have another email from Dean in Milwaukee. Hold on, Dean.
You've got mail.
Dean in Milwaukee. Is this our first Milwaukee email? Dean said, hey, John, the Packers should have moved on from McCarthy after the 2014 Seattle debacle. They waited too long, wasted 3 years of Rodgers' prime. Let's not do the same with LaFleur. Now, this, I think, presents an interesting point. And again, this is hindsight and revisiting some things. I have heard a lot of conversation about that, what Dean mentioned there in the aftermath of the 2014 meltdown in Seattle in the NFC Championship game. Because when you look at what happened after that, 2015 was such a weird year. It never felt like they had any rhythm offensively. That was the first time where it felt like Rodgers and McCarthy were bickering more, and we were getting more and more of the Rodgers eye rolls and shouting, what the bleep at the sideline after bad play calls and whatever else. It did kind of feel like a split or a schism was developing there between McCarthy and Rodgers. And then they won, 10 games maybe? And they just got in the playoffs as a wild card. Then they went to Washington as an underdog and won there, and the offense looked good finally for the first time since 2014. Then they went to Arizona. They had all of those injuries at the wide receiver spot. They end up going with Abradaris and Janis as their 1-2. That was the miracle Hail Mary, the second of that year. That was the miracle Hail Mary to Janis that got it to overtime. Then the coin doesn't flip. Cardinals get the ball to begin the game. Fitzgerald gets inside the 5 and then eventually scores the game-winning touchdown. That was a weird year. 2016 was the run-the-table year where you ultimately get to the NFC title game but get demolished by the Falcons in that game. And that was a year with a ton of injuries, especially in the secondary as well. 2017, Rodgers got hurt early, came back late, but didn't have enough in the tank to get them to the playoffs. And then 2018 was a lot like 2015, where it was not an inspiring offensive year. They were meandering, and eventually you got to that home game against Arizona where the crowd wasn't into it, and there were empty seats that day, even though sold out, obviously, but empty seats that day. The snow was coming down. Crosby misses a field goal, and they fired McCarthy that day in the middle of the year. So the argument is the team never recovered from what happened in 2014, and it never recovered with McCarthy as the leader of that team. And if you had the ability to get in the DeLorean and gun it to 88 and go back to the week after the 2014 NFC title game loss, maybe that was the time to fire McCarthy and hit the reset button and get a fresh perspective and a fresh mindset in that building. I think there's some validity to that argument. Now, the argument Dean is making is that Saturday was our 2014 NFC title game under Matt LaFleur. If you rip the Band-Aid off now and get a fresh perspective and a fresh voice in the locker room and you wipe away the Etch-a-Sketch or wipe off the chalkboard, whatever that is, and you start new, maybe this is the chance to avoid losing 2 more or 3 more years of the Jordan Love prime, of the Micah Parsons prime whenever he comes back. I guess I can just go back to this, and I saw another argument on Twitter talking about the title window. So when they got Parsons, the idea is that he signs the contract extension, and the idea is you kind of have a 3-year window here with Parsons. Not to say you can't sign him to a contract extension, and Love's going to get a contract extension, and maybe the window is longer than we think it is, but just at the beginning of the year, acquiring Parsons, giving him the contract you gave him, the length of the contract you gave him, it felt like we were at the beginning of a 3-year title window where we are in it full on to win a title. Well, one of those 3 years is gone. That was this year. Now you have 2 years left on that window. And the other argument I was reading was, do you really want to make a switch now, implement an entirely new offensive system, maybe an entirely new defensive system, which might be happening anyway? Jeff Hafley was interviewing in Tennessee yesterday. He's got 4 more interviews on the books with now 9 coaching vacancies, or 10. So he's interviewing, so you're probably already implementing something new there. Do you really want to go into year 2 of a 3-year window and basically starting over? I think there's valid points on each side. I don't know that the McCarthy 2014, that point in time necessarily lines up with what we're experiencing right now, but I can certainly understand what the way they lost, especially in the regular season and in the playoffs to Chicago, it had that 2014 feel. And if you bring back a bulk of your roster, which we don't know, as we talked about on Monday, you have 21 players that have expiring contracts. You figure the core guys, Jacobs and Love and Watson and Parsons and Evan Williams and Xavier McKinney, a lot of those core guys will be back, but you do have 21 players with expiring contracts on this team, and we don't know how many are going to be coming back. I guess what Dean is saying is if you bring back that exact same team or that exact same core with the same head coach, how do they shake loose of what happened? How do they shake free of the idea of what we talked about on Monday, that Matt LaFleur cannot close close games against good teams, can't close playoff games, doesn't have the killer instinct? Does that mentality start to permeate throughout the locker room, and they don't have a belief in him, and they don't have a belief that they can win those big games against good teams or playoff games against good teams? Is that something that happened to the Packers post-2014 in those 2 or 3 subsequent years? It's hard to know any of that. I understand what Dean is saying. I just don't think they match up precisely, but I get point taken. We'll respond with point taken. Now, I will say this about LaFleur. It's Wednesday as we record this. Now, let me get Twitter up, because I don't want to be in the middle of recording this podcast. I should just have Schefter's Twitter. I should just have it loaded up at all times. I don't want to record this podcast, click publish. Schefter's Twitter is so hard to find. There we go. There's so many fake Shefties out there. Do we have... Nope, we have John Harbaugh meeting with the Giants. Okay, nothing on LaFleur yet. Kevin Stefanski is doing something. I saw some Packer fans want Kevin Stefanski, the former Browns head coach, two-time coach of the year, but they were obviously awful this year. The Dolphins are interviewing him. I don't want to click publish on this podcast and leave for the day, and then 20 minutes later, Matt LaFleur is either signing an extension or gone. But here's what I'll say about where we're at on Wednesday. I am somewhat surprised that we do not have a contract extension right now. As we discussed on Monday, it felt like this was something that they were going to want to get done as quickly as possible. This is the number one check mark or check box you need to check off for the offseason checklist. Check, check, check. You've got to get this done first. Then I would think Goody, and then you can move forward under the Goody leadership of what you want to do with those 21 players, how you prepare for a draft now where you don't have a first-round pick, and all that kind of stuff. But the LaFleur extension is the first thing you have to get done. And with his conversation Sunday, who didn't sound like a guy who thought he was going to be moving on, and the report on Monday before we recorded the podcast from Shefty that said it seems like they're working toward an extension. Like we said on Monday, it felt like by the end of the day Monday and certainly by Tuesday this would be done, but here we are on Wednesday morning, it's not done. I don't think that necessarily means that it's not going to happen. But I do wonder if what we talked about on Monday is kind of happening in that you've got a highly desirable coach in LaFleur for other teams. And I think he's desirable for us still, right? Do you still find Matt LaFleur desirable? Text in your answer to 451-2310. But even though we're through 7 years and a lot of regular season wins and a lot of games like we had on Saturday, not to that level maybe, but a lot of games like we had on Saturday against good teams in the regular season and in playoff games where you're not quite able to get the job done. We've got a fan base that is maybe feeling like it's time to move on, but you've also got a coach that if he becomes available, almost every team with a coaching availability is going to want him, and they're going to throw buckets of money at him. My guess is if Matt LaFleur was on the open market and the Packers said, all right, we're moving on. We're going to hire John Harbaugh, whatever. We're going to open our coaching search, and we're going to interview a bunch of guys. But we're moving on from Matt LaFleur, and they cut him loose today or trade him or try to trade him. That's something that could happen, too. He's got 1 year left on his deal. Would you trade Matt LaFleur for a first-round pick? Is that what you would get back for him? I don't know. I don't know what kind of draft capital he would get back in a coach for draft capital trade. Would you replace your Micah Parsons first-round pick by trading Matt LaFleur? Now, there's a question. I don't know. But if he were out there, my guess is if he went to Tennessee, if he went to wherever, Miami, my guess is he would sign a 5-year contract for between $12 and $15 million. So as we went over on Monday, you're in this very peculiar negotiating thing where you've got a coach that you feel like has been excellent in the regular season, but you'd love to see more in the playoffs. You've got a fan base that is growing a little disenchanted with him. And on the flip side of it, you've got a 46-year-old head coach with a tremendous resume that if he is on the open market, he is going to get a massive offer from somebody. And LaFleur knows that, and his agent knows that. So maybe there is a bit of a stumbling block now on how many years you would give him and how much money you would give him. I am certain that when this probably 3-year contract extension hits for close to $13 or $14 million a year, the Packer fans that want him fired are going to react very calmly and rationally on social media to that. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to stick with this guy, if Ed Policy wants to stick with Matt LaFleur, he's going to have to pay the going rate, and he's likely going to have to pay the going rate that LaFleur would get on the open market if you cut him loose. Now, you can fire him. I know some Packer fans will say, oh, my God, he's going to be here for 3 more years. He's going to be so on top of the 1 year. Oh, my God, he's got 4 years left now. We've got 4 more years of LaFleur. Well, they could fire him at any point. They gave Mike McCarthy a contract extension before 2018. That didn't mean anything. They fired him in the middle of the year. They paid it out. They've got their coffers, all the money we paid for the parchment paper, all the money we pay for ticketing fees and season tickets and all the merch. So if you're a Packer fan that does not want Matt LaFleur around, and if at some point this week you read about a 3-year contract extension, you're thinking, oh my God, we've got 4 more years of this guy, they can fire him if they get off to a bad start. If it's clear next year what Dean was talking about in his email, that the type of losses they suffered at the end of this year have stuck with the team, and you feel like you need to move on, and they start off and they are 2-4 in their first 6 games or whatever, you can fire them at any time. It's not our money. You know what I mean? It's not ours. It's the money that sits in whatever accounts the Packers have, in offshore gambling accounts, and they can fire him at any point. But I wonder if that is the genesis of why this has taken a little extra time as opposed to just getting done right away on Monday. I wonder if they're having a debate about what we talked about on Monday. Hey, his agent's going to say, hey, if he's out there, he's going to get a 5-year, $70 million contract. That's what we want. If you want him here, that's what you're going to have to pay. And the Packers might be saying, well, I don't know about that. And then they'll put a tape in, a VCR tape, a VHS tape of Saturday night and what happened from the second half on. Kind of like an arbitration hearing. But I do wonder if that is the sticking point right now between the two sides. I am somewhat surprised that we have not gotten any kind of announcement yet. I did have a text from our buddy AJ, who's a podcast listener, morning show listener. He had read somewhere that there was going to be a Bisaccia clause, essentially, that if they do bring Matt LaFleur back, that he has to fire Rich Bisaccia. Bisaccia clause. Ho, ho, ho. Here's a turnover and a penalty. Every winter, Bisaccia clause comes down your chimney, and you get a special teams holding penalty and a missed PAT. But that there would be a Bisaccia clause. We may make something out of that. And maybe get the AI fired up. Can we get a Bisaccia Santa Claus AI-generated image? But there would be a Bisaccia clause that if they do bring Matt LaFleur back that says you must fire Bisaccia. They have to do that, right? They just have to. My guess is that if LaFleur comes back, and I think he is coming back, it's just a matter of time and figuring out the years and money. But if he comes back, there has to be a sacrificial lamb here. And I don't even think Bisaccia is a sacrificial lamb. I think he has earned every bit of his inevitable firing. But you have to do something. If they bring back LaFleur, now here's one thing I will say for me personally. I guess I don't mind at this point if they're bringing back LaFleur, but if they bring back LaFleur and they just run it back with Bisaccia at special teams and Stenavich as the offensive coordinator, I'd like to see them move on from him too, quite frankly. I don't know if you could lure a Mike McDaniel into an offensive coordinator position because he's probably going to get a head coaching offer maybe, or maybe a better coordinator position. I guess the Lions have already offered him their OC position in Detroit. I'd love to see them move on from Stenavich. Even though LaFleur is essentially the de facto offensive coordinator and head coach, he calls the plays and he runs the offense. But I'd like to see them bring in a new OC with maybe some fresh ideas. And obviously, we all want to see a new special teams coach at this point with how it's gone with Bisaccia. I have not read that a potential contract offer would have a Bisaccia clause in it. I love the idea of a Bisaccia clause cartoon. But I would think that's an inevitability. They have to. There's just no way. If they run this whole thing back and just say, let's just get healthy and see what happens, then I don't know. I'm not out. I was about to say I'll be out. We all know I'm not going to be out. But if they go back with Bisaccia again for another year, holy cow, that's going to be a tough sell to the public at large. But we're just still waiting to see what's going to happen here with LaFleur. And I am somewhat surprised that we do not have this as a done deal. I thought we'd lead the podcast on Wednesday with the news of Tuesday, probably, that there is a contract extension, how many years, how much money, all that stuff. But that is still something we're waiting on in Green Bay. All right, now let's talk about a coach who truly needs to be fired. The Milwaukee Bucks were on the floor last night. The Bucks wrapped up their 4-game West Coast trip on Sunday in Denver. We talked about that Monday. They played one of the best games they played this year in L.A. last Friday. They beat LeBron and Luka. Big defensive plays late. Won that game 105-101. As we discussed on Monday, this team just cannot be consistently decent or good at anything. And they took on Denver, and while I'll grant you, Denver is a very difficult place to play, and they are a good team when they're healthy, but they're not healthy. Denver was missing 4 starters, 4 of their 5, including the 3-time MVP Nikola Jokic. They were missing 4 starters, and their second leading scorer, Jamal Murray. The Bucks played the Denver Nuggets G League team on Sunday, and they lost in a close game, but they lost 108-104. You end the West Coast trip 2-2. If you told me before they left for the West Coast trip they're going to go 2-2 on a 4-game trip, I'd probably take that. But given that you were 2-1 heading into a night playing a Denver G League team and you couldn't win that was disappointing. But you go 2-2 on the trip. They come home with Minnesota last night. The Timberwolves are a very good team. They're a top 3 team in the Western Conference. However, Minnesota did not have their leading scorer and all-star, Anthony Edwards, and their starting center and one of the best defensive players in the league, Rudy Gobert. You could make a case their 2 best players, their best player for sure, and Ant Edwards was out last night. And whether you want to put Rudy Gobert second or third best on that team, that's up to you. But they were down both of those players last night. The Bucks were down Miles Turner. I guess he was under the weather. That was a problem in Sunday's game against Denver. I think Miles Turner had a poopy pants situation because he played the first half of that game in Denver. They said he was under the weather. He came out with the team to begin the second half, then ran back to the locker room, and then was not seen from or heard from again until halfway through the third quarter. He did eventually come back and play. But I think we probably know if he's suffering from the flu or something like that. That seems like a pretty logical conclusion that that's what happened. So he was out on Tuesday. So the Bucks were down Miles Turner. But you're finally back at home, and you get this gift of playing a really good team that doesn't have their two best players. That seems like a good chance to get a win, doesn't it? Not only do the Bucks lose, they get obliterated. And a problem on Tuesday is a problem they've had basically every game this year. When Giannis is not on the floor, they cannot hack it. They can't stay in games. They were down 3 in the first quarter with 3 minutes to go. Down 3. Close game. Giannis went to take his usual rest at the end of the first quarter for a couple of minutes. And in a blink, Minnesota had opened up a 38-20 lead. It went from 3 to 18 in 3 minutes. And that just set the tone for the night. Timberwolves led by 31 at halftime. Bucks made a little run in the third quarter, got it down to 18. But then the Timberwolves, in a blink, reopened it, and they win 139-106. No Ant Edwards and no Rudy Gobert. The Timberwolves shot 60% for the game, 52% from beyond the arc, and knocked down 22 threes. Now, during the game, I'm not sure how fired up I'm going to get about this, but during the game, in the first half, the Fiserv Forum crowd booed the Bucks. And why wouldn't you? Even with this team this year, where tickets are cheaper on StubHub, if you're taking a couple of people to the game and you're buying food and you're buying drinks, that is a $200 night. And for some people, that's not a big deal, but for some people, it is a big deal. Imagine if you're a kid and they got you tickets to this game for a Christmas gift, and your parents are taking you, and it's the one time a year you get to go, and you see that kind of effort on Tuesday. I can understand why the Fiserv Forum crowd booed. For whatever reason, Giannis seemed to take that personally, and then when he got an and one early third quarter, he booed the crowd. You hear him? That's him. 2 thumbs down for the Fiserv Forum crowd.
Count the bucket. A tough 2 to get. And Giannis with a message to the Fiserv fans who are displeased with this team.
They asked him about it post-game. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape over this. He basically said, I use this motivation. I've used it my entire life. We have seen him do what he did on the road. I think it was earlier this year. I forget where. That's the first time it's happened at Fiserv. And somebody did ask a follow-up question and said, well, yeah, we've seen you do that on the road, but doing it at home to the home crowd's a little bit of a different thing. And he said, no, it's not. I'm the same guy every game and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get too crazy about it. It was weird. I'll say that. But Giannis is Giannis, and I just don't think we need to blow this too out of proportion. Of course, the national Twitter media clipped that highlight and said, Giannis wants out. We just had a week and a half ago or a week ago, the big article on The Athletic where Giannis talked about wanting to be here, retire here. When he sees a wall, he doesn't want to jump over it. He wants to go through it, and everything that he said about staying with the franchise felt like that had put that fire out, at least temporarily. But then when the crowd is booing and he's booing back at the crowd, you knew what was going to happen with that. I didn't see a Shams tweet last night, but you knew what some of those different NBA pages, basketball pages were going to say about that. Ooh, Giannis wants out. The crowd booed him. He's booing the crowd. I really don't think it's that big of a deal. It was just odd. The bigger deal is this team, after a big win in LA against the Lakers, basically no-showed for 2/3 of the game in Denver on Sunday. And then absolutely did not show up against a shorthanded Timberwolves team and got blown the hell out on Tuesday night. It is time for Doc Rivers. Where's my Vince McMahon that we played throughout the podcast on Monday? Doc, you got to get out of here. It has to end. It has to. The only reason or the only explanation that I am going to accept at this point that Doc Rivers is still the head coach of this team is that Giannis went to John Horst or Giannis went to the owners, and who's still one of the owners? Wes Edens, and now it's Jimmy Haslam. Boy, I'll tell you, Jimmy Haslam came in as a big buyer when it was Wes Edens and Mark Lazary. They bought the team from Herb Cole, and they co-owned the team, and they won the title, and everything was gravy. And then Mark Lazary sold his share 2 or 3 years ago, and Jimmy Haslam, the owner of the Browns, and we know the history of that team, and sticking with coaches and making bad personnel decisions. He comes in with a boatload of money. There are maybe 30 people on the planet Earth that have more money than Jimmy Haslam. But that doesn't make you a good owner if you're a meddler, and he's a little bit of a meddler. I remember that being a thing when they brought him in, and I didn't want to get too into it because it did concern me. But my feeling at the time was, at least for the first few years, he's going to try to learn the ropes in the NBA. He's not going to do too much, and maybe it's something we have to worry about a couple of years down the road. Well, here we are a couple of years down the road. But you've got this guy, Doc, now, and unless Giannis is telling Haslam and Edens and Horst and whoever is in the hierarchy room, unless Giannis is specifically saying, I want Doc to stay, and if Doc stays, I want to go, that is the only reason I'm accepting now that Doc Rivers is going to stay the head coach in Milwaukee. As I have said a million times, I like Doc for the history in that building as a standout at Marquette. I love that his numbers retired at the venue he coaches at. I love him as a mentor. I love listening to him on podcasts when he doesn't have a job. He was on the Bill Simmons podcast a bunch. I enjoy listening to him talk about basketball, the evolution of basketball, his history in basketball. I think a lot of these young players look up to him because he played collegiately, he played professionally, he won a title in 2008. Remember we talked about John Harbaugh as it relates to the Packers? And yes, he has a ring, but it was in 2012. Doc's ring is even further back than that. And he had a team that year with Garnett and Allen and Paul Pierce that basically, unless somebody got hurt, I could have won a title with that, coaching that team. Probably not, but you get the point. It's been a long time. And I think for those reasons, he is respected by players because he is a former player. And Giannis has said that he prefers to play for somebody that played before so that coach knows what these guys are going through on a day-to-day basis, on a game-to-game basis over the course of an 82-game schedule in the playoffs and whatever else. For those reasons, I like Doc. The game has passed Doc by. I don't know that he's lost the locker room. I don't think he has because he's a personable guy. And like I just said, he has the respect because of his playing history and his coaching history. It is obvious at this point that the game schematically, from a defensive scheme to an offensive scheme, rotations, it has passed him by. It looks like we're running a team from 7 or 8 years ago. Every other offense has evolved in the NBA. This team is confused defensively. I'm not going to say they don't give effort defensively, but it doesn't look like they give effort defensively. It is time. In the immortal words of Kevin Green, it is time. So unless Giannis is saying that, and unless Giannis is saying, if Doc's gone, then I'm gone, and there are going to be some Bucks fans now, I think, with the way things have gone this year, that are going to say, fine, fine, maybe it is time to trade him and get some picks and move on from Giannis, move on from Doc, blow the whole thing up and see if you can build this thing up over the next 2 or 3 years. I'm not there, but there are going to be some Bucks fans that say that. Unless you're getting some kind of Giannis ultimatum, they cannot stick with Doc Rivers here. I just don't see this thing getting turned around. They've got plenty of deficiencies in terms of talent. I like Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr. as up-and-coming point guards. They are not consistent enough. Miles Turner has been a letdown. We know what Bobby is. He'll score, but he doesn't play a ton of defense. And other than that, this team doesn't have a lot of depth, and not everything is Doc's fault. But it is time to move on from Doc. Remember when they brought Doc in? And Adrian Griffin was the move in the post-Budenholzer era. Do you know what record Adrian Griffin had when he was fired from the Milwaukee Bucks? 30-13. He was 30 and goddamn 13. And we fired him for a variety of reasons. It sounded like there was an uprising in the locker room. It sounded like he had lost the locker room despite the fact that they were winning. But one of the arguments when Griffin got fired, I recall this clearly. One of the arguments was, yeah, they're winning games, but barely. That was one of the arguments. That's where we were as a franchise coming out of that year where they lost to the Heat in the playoffs and they were the number 1 overall seed. Think of how far we have fallen as a franchise since that. Since the beginning of 2023 saying, I think it's time to fire Griffin. They're 30-13, but they're not winning by a lot. They're beating bad teams close, so get rid of him. And one part of Adrian Griffin that was somewhat surprising because he was more of a defensive assistant coach in Toronto, that offense under Adrian Griffin in year 1 with Damon Giannis absolutely ripped. They scored 120, 125 a game, and I'll grant you, like we just said, it was against bad teams through 43 games, but they could score points. They were giving up a ton, but they could score some points. And I don't think we need to go back and say that was the wrong move. It was the right move to fire Griffin, but just as a measure of perspective, that is what we fired Adrian Griffin for and made the move to Doc in the middle of that year. He was sub 500 that year. They were out in the first round. They won what did they win? 46 games last year, 47 games last year, out in the first round. And now we're sitting at 17-23, and you're coming off of back-to-back losses against a Denver team minus 4 starters and a Minnesota team minus 2 starters, and one of those starters being one of the top 10 or 15 players in the NBA. And you lost that game, and you not only lost, I could have stomached if you lost last night's game by 2, if it was a close game or something weird happened. To get your doors blown off by a team without Ant Edwards and Rudy Gobert the way they did in embarrassing fashion, you got to move on. We have to move on from Doc Rivers. And I don't know what that means. It probably means Darvin Ham, his lead assistant, would finish the season. How different would that look? I don't think Darvin Ham in his 2 or 3 years as the head coach in LA, I don't think he was all that bad. I don't know that his schemes necessarily line up with Doc's. You know what I mean? If they fire Doc and you put in Darvin, is it just going to be the same thing except with Darvin Ham? Darvin Ham, being a player in the league, being a longtime assistant coach, being a former head coach in LA, he might have some different ideas, and he's just not the lead guy right now. So there is the possibility that if you bring in Ham, if Ham becomes the head coach for the rest of the year, that things could look a little different, that maybe there will be a pep in their step, or there will be a tweak done to the offensive or defensive scheme, and it may look better. But it's time to move on from Doc. If it doesn't happen now, if it doesn't happen in the middle of the year, then it has to happen at the end of the year. It has to. And that is assuming that Giannis, and like we said, why wouldn't you trust him? Because he has always been a man of his word. If he is committed to being here for the rest of his career and he's going to sign the $275 million contract extension that he can sign in October, heading into the last year of his deal, which would be next year, that would tack on 4 or 5 years, I think 4 years at the end of next year's deal. If he is going to be here for the long haul, if you don't fire Doc in the middle of the year, you absolutely have to move on from him at the end of this year. If you want to make it look good, if you want to make it a soft landing and transition him to an upper management role, failing upwards, if you want to put him as the vice president of basketball operations or whatever nice title you want to put on it so it doesn't look like he's fired, that's fine. But you either need to fire him right now in the middle of the year, or you absolutely have to fire him at the end of the year. Because they're sitting at 17-23. Remember what we said on Monday? They were 17-22 on Monday, and they had played the third easiest schedule in the league. 5 games under 500 with Giannis on your team, and I don't even care what the complimentary parts are. When you have Giannis on your team, and you have the third softest schedule in the NBA, and you're 17-22, that can't go on. This can't last. This can't go on. And especially with how soundly they were beaten last night. I can't have it. You have to move on. It is time. Everybody's wondering about Matt LaFleur, the head coach in this state, that it is time to move on from his Doc. I think I'd even put Doc above Luke Fickell, which I'm not totally done with Luke Fickell now, given what we've seen so far in the offseason, but I would put Doc above, on the firing scale, way above Luke Fickell at this point. Love him as a guy, love him as a mentor, love him as a podcast appearing guest. Don't love him as a head coach in the NBA anymore as the Bucks fall to 17-23. And look at this schedule they've got coming up. They're 17-23. They are at San Antonio on Thursday against Wemby and the Spurs. Loss. They're at Atlanta, Martin Luther King Day, Monday afternoon. Maybe a win there. Then they're at home with Oklahoma City, the reigning champions who could win 70 games this year. Loss. At home against Denver. Maybe Jokic is still out, so that could be a win. At home against Dallas, maybe a win. At Philly, loss. At Washington, should be a win, but they've got Trae Young now. You've already lost to them twice. At Boston, loss. I mean, you are going to play pretty difficult stretches here for the remainder of the year. If we see what we saw from this team last night and on Sunday in Denver, it's hard to envision this team even winning 35 games this year, which with Giannis is insane. Even with the Giannis injuries he's had in the games he's missed, if you go 35-47 or 34-48, which it kind of feels like is the direction we're going right now, that's not great, Bob. So they either need to turn something around quickly, or I think they just need to move on from Doc. But that, to me, that's the number one coach in the professional sports realm in the state that needs to be moved on from. Now let's end on a positive note, shall we? It was the Badgers and Minnesota. It was a big Minnesota-Wisconsin basketball matchup last night. Bucks and Timberwolves, and then Wisconsin and the Golden Gophers at the Barn in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. Is it in St. Paul? I don't know where the Barn is. Anyway, rivalry matchup. Badgers coming off of the upset of number 2 Michigan at Michigan, an undefeated Wolverine team, 14-0, blowing people out. Badgers get a road win there. Now, can you build on it? They take on Minnesota last night. Heading into the night, Minnesota 3-2 in the Big Ten. Badgers 3-2 in the Big Ten. Badgers were down 7 at the half. Second half, under 8 minutes to go. They're up by 9. Then the Golden Gophers come back. Badgers could not hit free throws late. 11 seconds left, 75-72 Wisconsin. Minnesota ties it with a 3. 4.5 seconds left. John Blackwell got the final word with a walk-off winner, which means we get a Matt Lepay game-winning call. Here's the whole final sequence. Oh, no, this is... No, we'll play that one, too. That's the TV broadcast. Here we go. Here's Lepay.
Left. Osman leaves it for Tyson for 3 in the tie. It's good. We're tied. 4.6 seconds to play. Inbounds pass Blackwell with 3, with 2, with 1. Blackwell for the win. Good! John Blackwell for 3. John Blackwell for the win.
Inject it into my veins.
Osman leaves it for Tyson for 3 in the tie. It's good. We're tied. 4.6 seconds to play. Inbounds pass Blackwell with 3, with 2, with 1. Blackwell for the win. Good! John Blackwell for 3. John Blackwell for the win.
I'm storming all over the court. How about the crowd reaction in Minnesota? It felt like a pretty split crowd when Blackwell hit that.
John Blackwell!
That's the Minnesota crowd.
Seconds to play. Inbounds pass Blackwell with 3, with 2, with 1. Blackwell for the win. Good! John Blackwell for 3. John Blackwell for the win.
That is the first game winner for the Badgers since Bronson Koenig. Now, I'm going to try to load this up for you. I don't think this is the Lepay call, but Brian Anderson was on the call that night. That was the first game-winning shot in the last second since Wisconsin beat Xavier in, was it the Sweet 16 or the round of 32? That was the 7-2 matchup.
2 to go.
And it's BA.
Trip to the Sweet 16. Koenig's got it. Rises up. The shot. And it's good! It's good! Wisconsin has won it!
Remember Bill Murray's kid was an assistant coach for Xavier, and they cut to Bill Murray in the crowd, and he had basically the crying Jordan meme. Was the
2 to go. Trip to the Sweet 16. Koenig's got it. Rises up. The shot. And it's good! It's good! Wisconsin has won it!
That was Gardo, right? Was that Guard's first tournament run? He took over that year, I think, in 2016. He took over a couple of games into the year. So the Badgers are 12-5, 4-2 coming out of that. Remember I said before the BYU game very early in the year, I like the makeup of this team. I like the Boyd-Blackwell guard combo, even though it's not as good defensively as it was with Blackwell and Tanjay last year. I do like Nolan Winter as a slightly better version of Steven Crow. I think I'm saying that as a compliment. Austin Rapp has not worked out so far, but I think there's still hope there. He's only a sophomore. Braden Carrington, remember, was it last podcast I said? I really like what he brings off the bench. He knocked down 7 threes last night, 21 points off the bench. I do like the talent on this team. It has taken them a little bit after a hot start and then getting blown out by Nebraska and getting blown out by BYU. It has taken them a little bit to find their footing, but I think they are now. And I said early in the year, I don't know if they're going to get to this, but remember I said I thought they'd be a top 15 team at some point or a top 20 team and a 4 or 5 seed come tournament time. I think that's still in play. They are 12-5, 4-2. They will host Rutgers at the Kohl Center on Saturday. Marquette lost last night. What a disaster. 92-68 to St. John's. 6-11, 1-6 in Big East play. Shaka. Woof. So that was the basketball roundup last night. We got a ball night last night. Wisconsin, Marquette, and the Bucks all in action. All right, let's make some NFL.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Never tell me the odds.
If someone gives you 10,000 to 1 on anything, you take it.
See, that's a cool G, Daddy-O. Now you gotta let it ride.
All right, after the 2-1 week last week and the futures all added in, we are 43, 37, and 3. 6 units up on the year, and we still have those 2 Coach of the Year bets, Ben Johnson at 6-1 and Vrabel at 7-1, but we won't know that until they get to the Honors Awards before the Super Bowl. So I've got 2 this week. I've got the Buffalo Bills. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. They are plus 1.5 on the road in Denver. Broncos are the 1 seed. They had the bye. It is the second year in a row these two teams have met in the playoffs. Bills blew the Broncos out 31-7 in Buffalo last year. Bo Nix's playoff debut. I expect the Broncos will look much better this year at home than they did last year at Buffalo. We know the Bronco defense is a top-level defense. I still don't know that I fully trust Bo Nix in a playoff game, especially matched up against Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the best individual player that is still standing in the playoffs, and I will ride with him, and I want to see this Bills team win a title. I will take them plus, is it 1.5 or 2? Hold on. It is Buffalo's plus 2. Buffalo plus 2 in Denver. That is the Saturday game, 3:30. Saturday night is the Niners Seahawks. I'm not betting on that game. It is a 7.5-point spread in favor of Seattle. I kind of want to bet on the Niners plus 7.5, but we know that Seattle crowd in the playoffs. They are always revved up. Seahawks just beat the Niners the last week of the regular season to win the division and get the 1 seed, and they beat them soundly. Niners beat Seattle way back in week 1 or 2. So I've got nothing on that, but that is the Saturday night game. Then on Sunday, I am taking the Texans plus 3 in New England. Patriots were the 2 seed, 14-game winner this year. They won against the Chargers in New England Sunday night, where they win by 16-3. That Texans defense is the number 1 defense in the league for a reason. The biggest question for Houston is C.J. Stroud, who looked like there was no way that guy was going to miss. He was the rookie of the year, his rookie season, obviously. Big stats there. Has not been the same quarterback since. It's getting a little bit better, but he has not really resembled that quarterback from his rookie year at any point over the past couple of years. But he's been okay, and that defense is so good. And the Patriots, we know, they're 14-3. Hopefully Vrabel wins Coach of the Year. They won the division. They won a playoff game. But that schedule they played was 10-ply. It was so soft. And now you've got an elite defense going into New England. Drake May is still only in his second year, and he was in the MVP conversation, rightfully so this year. But this is a different level now. Divisional round playoffs, number 1 defense. I will ride with that Texans defense, plus 3 on the road. And then those are the 2 picks I have. The last game of the weekend is the Rams-Bears game, 5:30. Rams are 4-point road favorites. God, I just want to see the Bears get demolished, please. I'm not betting on it, but that's what I'm hoping for. That's my emotional bet. So the 2 bets, Bills plus 2 in Denver, Texans plus 3 in New England. That'll do it for us here on your Wednesday morning. Let's just get one last check of Shefty, just to make sure nothing's happened. All right, nothing's happened so far. All right, let's get this thing up, and then at least it's up before anything happens. Have a happy, safe rest of your work week and weekend. We'll be back on Monday, recapping divisional round weekend, hopefully a new head coach for the Bucs, although probably not likely. And we'll recap the weekend in college basketball as well, and we'll be a week closer, 5 days closer to spring training. We're getting there. Have a happy, safe week. We'll chat with you then.